Alright, we are back with a new video, and today we'll be updating the Survivor 42 power rankings following episode 6, aka the Merge episode. And given that this was a 2-hour episode, there is quite a bit to talk about, quite a bit to unpack in terms of the game and the edit. But let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into the video. So starting at the list at number 12, we have the Merge boot from the season, and here we have Lydia. And admittedly, Lydia was not my first pick to be the merge boot. As I explained in previous rankings, I thought that either Tori or Lindsay were more likely candidates, maybe even Chanel. But once the episode played out, it sort of became evident to me. We're obviously in episode 6. Mike says he would take a bullet for her and hi, although that's later undercut later in the episode. She's put on the orange team, who win the challenge, has a confessional about the Applebee's reward, has a confessional about liking Jonathan as he's useful around camp, seems to bond with Marianne. Later, her and Hi find themselves in a majority alliance with Jonathan and Drea, assures Chanel that Roxroy is a target, however has a confessional about playing dumb, which Chanel picks up on and causes Chanel to not trust her. Later on, Roxroy smashes the hourglass, making her vulnerable, talks to Chanel and Lindsay about voting out Jonathan, tells Omar and how Lindsay is targeting Marianne, has a confessional about how all these people want to work together, but given the circumstances, things could get messy. And then ultimately, she's voted out and is the merge boot in a pretty consensus vote for the most part, although things did get all over the place to a certain extent. And as I said earlier, coming into the episode, I did not expect Lydia to be the merge boot. I didn't think she had any real shot of winning. However, given her relationship to Hi, which I felt was an important relationship, I felt like she probably had a bit more longevity to her. I could have seen her getting towards the end of the game, kind of like a Chelsea from Ghost Island, or possibly a Liana from 41, and then getting cut in a sort of weird spot towards the mid-merge, some spot like that. However, once the episode started to play out, it became pretty evident that Lydia would be the boot, especially after Chanel and Tori, the two quote-unquote easy votes, both became immune. And obviously with her getting a visibility spike in this episode, despite not being super positive, those were all signs that she would probably be the boot here. But if we're talking about her game as a whole, it was not great. She probably would have been voted out at the first tribal if it wasn't for all the advantages and twists coming into play, like Mike's Beware advantage and Chanel losing her vote from the summit. Those are all things that allowed her to stay, whereas I feel like if everyone got the vote, there's a decent chance she is voted out there. But she does survive the vote, is put in a decent spot. And you'd think coming into the merge, she would have been in a decent position with Hi there, and obviously getting into the majority alliance. But once those easy targets became immune, that alliance pretty much had to turn on each other, and she essentially became the most expendable person there, with even her closest ally Hi voting her out, but that was more of a self-preservation move, and we'll talk about Hi later on. But at the end of the day, it wasn't a great game, and as I said, she wasn't my first pick to be the merge boot, but it became pretty evident as the episode went on. So because of that, she's here at number 12. And with that, we are now moving to the 11 people still in the game. And as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely I think it is that they'll win the game from this point, based on their edit as well as current game position. But at number 11, and really these bottom two spots are people who are at the bottom of the tribe right now and definitely have the highest probability of going home the next few rounds. In fact, they were the intended targets coming into the round. It's just through both of them winning immunity that they were able to be safe, but it was still a bad episode for them edit-wise, so it's just a matter of determining the order. But at number 11, I decided to go with Tori. And again, it was a pretty bad episode for Tori, where in episode 6, Roxroy talks about being annoyed by her, has a confessional about how she's trying to get information from Roxroy about the summit, but is annoyed that he's not opening up, which makes sense. She says she's done with him, which she reiterated from the previous episode. She's put on the orange team who wins the challenge, has a confessional about being the only Ika member to be on the winning team and how she's happy Roxroy is at exile, talks to the team about the last tribal, has a confessional about wanting to flip and expose all of Ika's secrets. She's willing to flip and was waiting for the individual part of the game, but later on, Roxroy smashes the hourglass, making her vulnerable, and despite this, she wins immunity. Afterwards, Romeo talks to her about targeting Jonathan and how Mike has been sucking up to him. And then ultimately at Tribal, Tori votes for Jonathan, which obviously puts her on the outs to a certain degree. But on the whole, this wasn't a great episode for her. I mean, the only reason she isn't targeted here is because she wins immunity. And obviously, her hatred of Roxroy was definitely a big factor in Roxroy deciding to smash the hourglass. But even aside from that, I mean, even though she has expressed her willingness to flip, I mean, she's still at the bottom, and people don't really want to work with her. People don't really want to trust her in game, and the edit didn't really do much to prop her up. And I can see her being one of the next few boots. I mean, either her or the next person we'll be talking about. However, I feel like this Tori had the worst edit in the episodes, although slightly, mind you. And I feel like she's probably more of an immediate target than the next person we'll be talking about. So it's not looking great, and she's here at number 11. Now moving on to number 10, and similar to Tori, this person is also in a pretty bad position. Although I feel like their edit is slightly better, and they kinda have an out, whereas I feel like Tori really doesn't. And here we have Chanel. And again, I can see Chanel being one of the next few boots as well. I mean, she is at the bottom as well, and a big reason she wasn't targeted is also because she got immunity through the hourglass twist. But if we're looking at her episode as a whole, she has a confessional reacting to winning out at Tribal. She says Tribal is both amazing and scary while explaining her Mike vote. She tries talking to Mike about it, but Mike's upset by the situation. Mike says he'll never trust her again, which makes sense. Later, she's put on the blue team, who loses the challenge, has a confessional about being upset losing the challenge because she knows the chances of going home are now higher, and also because of her position. After finding out she lost her vote at the last Tribal and that he won't vote at the upcoming Tribal, Omar no longer trusts her as well, which is bad. Walks in on high Jonathan, Lydia, and Drea as they're strategizing, has a confessional about needing to be in the right talks at the right time to get in the majority. However, no one really gives her any information. I mean, Lydia tells her that Roxroy is the agreed upon target, which is a lie. However, she notes that Lydia is holding back and again is clearly lying. Once again, tries talking to High and his alliance, but no one gives her anything, and it's very awkward. Roxroy smashes the hourglass, making her safe. In a Tribal, despite us having her speak about Lydia and lying to her, she doesn't actually vote for Lydia. She joins Tori in voting for Jonathan, so that's not kind of great at the end of the day. And again, overall, Chanel's in a bad spot. I mean, like Tori, she's at the bottom. She likely would have been voted out if she were an option, but obviously with the hourglass, she was automatically safe. And I still see her being targeted moving forward. I mean, Mike doesn't trust her. High and Lydia don't seem to trust her that much. They've completely moved on from her at that point. And again, this wasn't a great episode for Chanel either, edit-wise, where she talks about trying to get in with the majority, but we see the majority basically ignore her, and they don't really hide it super well that she's not in with them, and that's not great. Also, the fact that she does get to talk about Lydia holding back and how she has reasons to not trust Lydia, but then doesn't vote for Lydia at the Tribal, which partially speaks to her position in the game, but is still kind of awkward at the end of the day. But I guess the main reason I have Chanel above Tori is that I feel like her edit was slightly better. I mean, she did get to explain her vote from the previous Tribal, even if it was undercut later on. And she does seem to be more involved in trying to get in the majority, even if it's unsuccessful, than Tori. So I think those are things I can give Chanel some credit for. But realistically, I don't feel like either of them are winning. I feel like both of them are pretty prime targets, like at the upcoming Tribals, so that's not great. And it's a big reason I have her here at number 10. Now moving on to number 9, and we actually have the person who was at the bottom of last week's rankings, and this wasn't like an exceptionally great episode for them either, but they did get at least some positive content. But here we have Roxroy, aka the recipient of the hourglass twist. And this was an interesting case of comparing Roxroy's edit in this episode to Erica's edit from 41 when she got to go on the hourglass twist. I mean, in episode 6, he talks about how Tori has been trying to get information from him about his visits to the summit in the previous episode, and he's very annoyed by it. He calls himself predictable and wants that for an alliance, and Tori is unpredictable and therefore someone he doesn't want to take further in the game, draws the Grey Rock at the challenge, and ultimately gets the hourglass twist. Once on exile, he has a confessional about being confused about the reasoning for the team to send him there. He feels like he was exiled in order to be weakened, but he wants Survivor to be hard, which is something, I guess. Has trouble building the firewall in exile. He tells his kids to get things done, spots the hourglass, but without information, he's not sure what it does. He feels like he needs to earn a spot in the next stage of the game. He says that he gets to learn new things about himself while in exile. He's particularly trying to take in the beauty of the Fijian Islands. Gets to talk about how his eyesight is declining and how this is his opportunity to enjoy the beautiful sights. Later, when Jeff visits him and presents him with the twist, he smashes the hourglass because why wouldn't he? Making himself safe. Has a confessional about how he's safe as he's meeting the others. He knows he needs to work quickly to build alliances. However, he doesn't know what has happened. Quickly connects with Jonathan, who informs him that Drea brought him into an alliance. And then at Tribal, he votes for Lindsay for some reason. And on the whole, I mean, this is sort of a mixed bag episode for him. Where obviously, on one hand, he is out of the loop at the vote. I mean, despite being brought into the alliance by Drea, I mean, it's pretty evident that he wasn't included on the plan, prompting his vote for Lindsay, which goes pretty much unexplained. And when we look at his edit during his time on exile, I mean, it is positive. I mean, he does get personal content talking about his eyesight, about how beautiful Fiji is. But when we're comparing it to Erica's from 41, I mean, it is pretty lackluster. I mean, and really demonstrates how this is circumstantial. Now, I know I said that at the time of the merge last season, where I felt like Erica's intro package and introduction felt like circumstantial content, given she was the one being sent to exile. And, you know, at first that seemed to be confirmed with her getting a decline in content shortly after the merge, only for it to pick up a couple episodes later. This feels more like nothing, if I'm being honest. I mean, like I said, Roxroy has been undercut multiple times in the edit. Even in this episode, where he talks about how he needs to get into the alliance and is brought into the alliance, he still isn't being included into the plans. Obviously, Tori's going after him. And I understand his decision to smash the hourglass. I mean, obviously it's a no-brainer, but it's definitely helped by the fact that, one, most of his allies in Ika are on the losing team, so by smashing the hourglass, those people will be immune. But the other thing was that he hates Tori, who is the one Ika member who's on the winning team. So by smashing the hourglass, he'd be making her vulnerable. Now, obviously, Tori wins immunity, so that's kind of a moot point. But obviously, it's the correct decision. Then again, when isn't it the correct decision to smash the hourglass? But as I said, I mean, Roxroy's edit was a pretty interesting one to compare to Erica's, and it just reinforced my belief that he's not winning the game. I mean, yes, it's a nice story hearing him talk about his eyesight and stuff like that, but it's not really connected to the game at all and feels very circumstantial. And I guess that's a reason that I don't think Roxroy is winning on top of everything else that's happened. But, you know, it's still a positive episode for him, enough to keep him at the bottom. And he's here at number 9. Now we're moving on to number 8, and we have an interesting person to talk about. This was someone who I actually thought could have been the merge boot coming into it, but by the end it was pretty obvious they weren't going. And here we have Lindsay. And as I said, I thought Lindsay was a contender to be the merge boot here coming into the episode based on the similarities I noted in her edit to Sydney. But by the end of it, I mean, it's pretty clear that the edit just wasn't there for Lindsay to go home. And it didn't really make sense in-game either, despite her getting a vote at Tribal. But in episode 6, she draws the Grey Rock during the challenge, but the Orange team chooses to send her on reward. Has a confessional about needing to check in with Drea and Hi about the amulets. Says there's many possibilities over how they will play out. Roxroy smashes the hourglass, making her vulnerable. Later on, talks to Lydia and Chanel about wanting to target Marianne, and given she has a lot of advantages, they are part of the plan, has a confessional about the plan to vote out Jonathan. She notes that Jonathan and Omar are a tight duo, therefore she needs to take a strike at Marianne. Even so, she ultimately votes with the rest of the Takus in voting out Lydia, and on the whole, this was just kind of an okay episode for her. Again, I feel like if she probably could have gotten a visibility spike, possibly have been the merge boot there. However, honestly, I felt like Lydia was probably more likely, or even Tori was more likely as well. So it's not too surprising that she isn't the boot here by the end of it. But I'm still not feeling great about her at the end of the day. She is the least developed Taku member, and I don't feel like she's winning the game. And I feel like people have started to back off a bit from Lindsay being a winner contender, though I'm sure the arguments will continue to come up over the season. But, I mean, compared to the rest of the field, I feel like she Doesn't have as many holes as people we just talked about, but it's still not great. She's here at number 8. Now we're moving on to number 7, and this was not that great of an episode for this person, although they did have some minor moments of positivity. And here we have Romeo. And this was a weird episode for Romeo. We're obviously in episode 6, he's on the blue team who loses the challenge, has a confessional back at camp about how little rice they have, and he starts to get skinnier, even calls himself a skeleton. As Hai opens up about meeting his partner, he has a confessional about being LGBT and how he struggled to open up about his identity. Hai, on the other hand, is more open about it, and he's really connecting to Hai. Talks to Hai about how he's worried about being accepted, has a confessional about how you can't hide on Survivor and how he worries about not being accepted once he gets home. He doesn't want to disappoint people, and Hai comforts him as a result. He feels like he's starting to become his true self. Roxroy smashes the hourglass, making him safe. Later on, talks to Tori about how Jonathan should be targeted due to him being strong, says that Mike has been sucking up to him, has a confessional about how he feels like he's a different person now that he's safe and he wants to target Jonathan, talks to their alliance about the Jonathan plan, but despite being part of the Jonathan plan, he votes for Marianne for some reason at Tribal, which is just very weird to me. I mean, considering how much he talked about Jonathan. But on the whole, this was sort of a mixed bag for Romeo, where on one hand, yes, he does get plenty of personal content talking about being gay and how he's connecting with Hai through that. But, I mean, compared to some other relationships we'll be talking about in a bit, I feel like it's not really as big for Romeo. And again, I feel like he was just undercut again in the edit, where, again, he talks about targeting Jonathan, but then doesn't even vote for Jonathan at Tribal. And the other weird thing is that despite Drea being in the majority alliance, and despite Drea being established as being closer to Romeo, Drea doesn't even bother pulling Romeo into the vote. He tries to rope in Roxroy into the vote for whatever reason, which is just very weird as well. And again, considering the previous episode was all about Romeo wanting to be close to Drea and to prop up Drea's game, it feels very weird now considering Drea's in a better game position than him for the time being. Now, granted, she could pull him in the next round, but considering the merge vote episode is usually a big deal for the winner in terms of their edit, I mean, the fact that Romeo's edit here was very wonky with some ups and downs, I can't have him too high, and because of that, I'm here at number 7. Now we're moving on to number 6, and technically this person here got a better edit than the next person I'll be talking about within this episode. However, I feel like overall, across the season, this person's edit has not been as strong. But here we have Drea. And Drea had an alright episode, if you ask me. We're obviously in episode 6. She has a confessional about how things are never calm with Tori around. Talks to Romeo about how Tori is annoying and on the bottom. She wants to get out Tori as soon as possible, but Tori always finds a way to slip by. Later on is on the blue team who loses the challenge. And we see her struggle a lot during the challenge where she's unable to get up the boulder to the first level of the tower, which is a big reason why the team loses the challenge. Later on has a confessional about Roxroy being part of her alliance, which consists of Hai, Lydia, and Jonathan as the core, so again, good game position for her there. Therefore, he could change the game to benefit her. However, she knows she can't rely on it. She even articulates what the twist is going to be before it actually happens, so that's something, I guess. She knows Mike has an idol as well, given that he said the phrase, therefore she wants to work with Mike. Talks to Mike about the idols, and they form a deal to work together. Tells him that Tori is at the bottom, warns her that about Tori and how she's next to go, tells the Alliance plus Omar that she has an extra vote as well, has a confessional about how revealing this information is necessary to build trust. Later on, Roxroy smashes the hourglass, making her safe, and of course, she ends up voting in the majority to take out Lydia. And on the whole, like I said, this was a good episode for Drea, more so from a game standpoint than from a pure edit standpoint, where obviously she does end up in the majority here. And I guess I should probably mention this now, how it's very interesting how this majority alliance consists of pretty much everyone has an idol or advantage at this point. I mean, Drea, of course, being the most loaded person advantage-wise, she's aligned with both the amulet people, with Lindsay and Hai. She's aligned with all the people with idols, with Mike and Marianne. And she also has Jonathan, who is quite the challenge beast, although that wasn't demonstrated in this particular episode. she's definitely in a very solid position. She's aligning with people who have all these advantages, and that's a very advantageous position for her to be in gameplay wise. However, will it translate to a win? And I don't think it will. I mean, based on previous episodes, she is technically is being set up as a Shannon figure to a certain extent. I mean, I don't really see her winning the game, as I feel like other people have more solid stories backing them, and I feel like other people have better edits in this particular episode than she does. But it's not too bad at the end of the day. I still think she'll be a contender moving forward. She's in a solid position now, gameplay wise. And it's for those reasons that I have her here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and I know I've had this person as a top contender for a while, and I feel like that's been sort of based on their edit, even though I've noticed some flaws in their edit. However, this was a mostly bad episode for them, if I'm being perfectly honest, despite them getting quite a bit of content. But here we have High. And this was a very strange episode for High. We're obviously in episode 6. Mike says he would take a bullet for him, and Lydia is on the orange team, who win the challenge, gets to explain the team's decision to send Roxroy to exile, talks to the tribe about the reward, talks to Drea and Lindsay about the amulets. They agree to protect each other and use their amulets to further their games, but has a confessional about it. However, he's nervous that they will come for him in order to grab their power, which he says the game is all about. He wonders who will strike first. He has a confessional later on about how strong and useful Jonathan is around camp. He's not opposed to working with someone he's intimidated by. He wants to keep Jonathan around as a shield. Talks to the tribe about meeting his partner. Romeo talks to him about being gay, as well as the two of them bonding over them being gay. Tells Omar that Janelle threw him under the bus at the last tribal. Talks to Jonathan about their current bonds. Tells Jonathan that he wants to work with him. Has a confessional about how everyone is opening up. However, he needs to now establish agency, whether through his social skills or building numbers. He talks to Jonathan, Drea, and Lydia about building an alliance. They agree to include Mike and Roxroy. They agree that between them, plus Omar and Lindsay, they'll have the numbers. He's certain that he has a decent strategy. He warns the alliance about Chanel. Later on, has a confessional breaking down the tribal dynamics, but Chanel and Tori are easy targets. Roxroy smashes the hourglass, making him vulnerable. Later on, Omar talks to him about the Lydia plan, prompting him to try to campaign for a Marianne boot. Has a confessional about how he doesn't want Jonathan to go, given that he considers himself a more physical person, which is kind of a strange statement. He says that moments like this are the ones that separate the weak players from the strong players, but in the end, he's unable to save Lydia. In fact, he even votes for Lydia. And on the whole, this, like I said, he did get a lot of content in this episode and a lot of game content. He gets a lot of credit for putting together the initial majority alliance with him and Lydia. And it seems like, like he's building some relationships. He's building with Romeo, it seems. He wants to work with Jonathan. And again, he is building this majority alliance, mainly with people with the advantage in the game, which includes him. However, he doesn't get his way. And I feel like the edit actually kind of undercuts him here, where, again, him talking about needing to establish agency is such a big statement for him to make. And him saying that this is tribal will determine where the strong players will prevail and where the weak players will crumble. And he is unable to save his closest ally, Lydia. And yes, while he does vote for Lydia, I mean, he didn't want that to happen. So clearly through that, he contradicts his own statement about wanting to establish agency. And with him saying that this was the big test, he sort of fails the test. Now, again, I understand from an in-game perspective why he did target a vote for Lydia in this situation. He wanted to stick with the majority. He didn't want to stick out. However, again, edit-wise, he was just undermined by this whole agency talk. And for me, that was enough to really lower his win equity. Mind you, I think there is some way in which this can be redeemed, mainly by the fact that episode 2, established the fact that he is someone who sees the game as something in which he needs to put aside some of his personal preferences by him eating the crab despite being a vegan. And this could be interpreted the same way, where he wanted to keep Lydia around, but was forced to vote her out in order to stay in the majority. However, he doesn't really get to talk about that in this episode. Mind you, he could talk about it at the beginning of the next episode, but still, the fact that they included lines like that about him wanting to establish agency and him saying that this is a test where stronger players will prevail, I mean, that's a pretty big knock at the end of the day. And part of the reason why I dropped him down to number 5 on this list. Mind you, again, I still think there are some ways in which he can be redeemed. However, after this bad episode, I decided to drop him down to number 5. Now we're moving on to number 4, and admittedly, this wasn't the best episode for this person either. However, I feel like through High having a bad episode, this person did move up a bit, but here we have Marianne. And this was an okay episode for Marianne. I mean, in episode 6, she's on the orange team who win the challenge. Mike talks to her about the idol, has a confessional about how she hasn't had much power so far, but now she has power at the merge along with her idol. Her strategy is to listen to other people and agree to their plans. That way, she'll let them be in the spotlight and not her. Tells Tori about how Drea could be a problem later on. Says that you need allies and options to do well. Where later on, where Roxroy smashes the hourglass, she becomes vulnerable. Has a confessional about how she doesn't want to vote out Jonathan given their relationship, which sort of weird compared to the last episode, but whatever. She is a talked about target, given her idol, but ultimately she isn't really in too much danger. I mean, even Omar tells her to play her idol at one point, or at least consider playing the idol, but she only gets 2 votes from Lydia and Romeo, while she does vote in the majority to take out Lydia. And again, this was an okay episode for her. I feel like the main highlight came earlier in the episode when we saw her talk to all these people and her talking about her strategy moving forward. It makes me think she has plenty of longevity in the game, and I feel like that's enough to elevate her up a couple spots. However, I feel like the top 3 people definitely have better cases to make based on their edits, and with Marianne being likely to flip in the near future despite talking about her relationship with Jonathan and her staying loyal to the Takus at this tribal, I feel like she could be an important figure moving forward in terms of the gameplay, especially with her idol. But for now, I decided that 4 was a decent spot for her, so I have her here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and I feel like at this point, this is the definitive top 3. I feel like these top 3 people have a very good shot of winning the game. It's just a matter of the order, and at number 3, I decided to bump this person up a couple spots from the previous episode, and here we have Jonathan. And this was a very good episode for Jonathan. We're obviously in episode 6, he's on the orange team who win the challenge. He is a dominant presence during that challenge, like with moving the boulder and kind of helping his tribe get up the tower during that. Later on has a confessional about how he almost wanted to go to exile himself, but accepted the reward because he was starving. He talks about how he's a big eater, how he likes to eat 18 eggs, which is quite a lot. He wants to lay low, knowing that he's a big guy and a big threat. He needs to rely on his social game. And we see that with him bonding with Mike over how people make judgments about them and how he needs to prove others wrong. Has a confessional about bonding with Mike, of course. Lydia and High compliment him as well due to him being helpful around camp. High wants to keep him around as a shield. Tells his alliance about Marianne as a target. Has a confessional that Chanel and Tori would be the first to go. He said that he threw out Marianne's name not because he actually wants to target her, but to throw out the scent of their relationship, which is sort of an interesting thing to talk about here. Roxroy smashes the hourglass, making him vulnerable. Omar tells him that he's being targeted, and we see people like Tori and kind of Chanel also target him as well. Has a confessional about how he knows he's a threat, tries proposing the Marianne plan, and he's confident that Omar will have his back. However, Omar is able to bring together the Takus, and of course, they're able to vote out Lydia. And this was a pretty solid episode for Jonathan. I mean, I think the biggest thing came in the middle when he was bonding with Mike, and they get to talk about how people have misperceptions about them, and how even Mike says that he wants someone like him or Jonathan to win the game. And I feel like that's very good for Jonathan. And while people do target him, I mean, we have plenty of people say that they want to keep him around as a shield. Mind you, from an in-game standpoint, that's probably not ideal, as again, he'll eventually be in a position to where he has to win out. And considering that the post-merge won't have necessarily challenges that benefit him, like the one we saw in this episode, I mean, is it a guarantee that he's going to win out? I mean, not necessarily. But again, for the time being, he's in a solid game position. He is in the majority alliance. However, again, he could be in danger later on. And I think that's a big reason I have him at number 3, is that I don't feel like there are too many people that actually want to take him to the end. I feel like there are a lot of people who are just using him as a shield for the time being, but he's still in the majority and he's been getting a very positive edit. So because of that, I'm here at number 3. Now we're moving on to number 2, and I finally made the decision. I pulled the trigger and I decided to drop Omar to number 2. And this may seem like a weird time to do it, as on paper, this was a pretty good episode for Omar. I mean, episode 6, he's on the blue team who lose the challenge, has a confessional about how the merge is where the real game starts. One would assume that the tribes would sit together, and he considers himself one of the most vulnerable people. He says he'll be like a shark that jumps out and eats people, joins Hai and Romeo, where Hai tells him that Chanel shouldn't be trusted, has a confessional about how Chanel didn't vote at the last tribal, which means he won't have a vote at the next tribal. He feels like he can't trust Chanel anymore after she seemed to lie to him. Talks to Mike about how his partner and how he's planning to get married. Tells Mike he likes him, which he reciprocates. He's brought into the majority alliance, but doesn't seem to be in the core of it. Roxroy smashes the hourglass, making him safe. Has a confessional about how he needs to shut up, given he's safe and doesn't have a vote. Even so, he knows it'd be bad for Jonathan to go. And with Lydia talking to him about it, and not being sure about being on board with the plan, has a confessional about how Lydia is willing to cut Jonathan or Marianne, prompting him to feel like Lydia should be targeted. He wants to keep Taku unified, given all the assets that Marianne and Jonathan provide. He tells Marianne she may need to play her idol. As he's talking to more people, he talks about the need to combine information to create his own lies, which is necessary to target Lydia. He even tries talking to Hai and Mike about flipping on Lydia, where Mike seems open to it. In a tribal, of course, he doesn't vote. However, Taku does stick together, he gets his way, and Lydia goes home. And on paper, this is a great edit. I mean, like I said, all season, he's been getting a very conventional winner's edit, and part of that includes a big merge episode. He does get a big merge episode where he gets a lot of strategic content. He gets the bulk of the credit for the Lydia vote, despite him not actually having a vote at the tribal. He gets credit for keeping Taku together, which, again, brings back a theme from a couple episodes ago where he was worried about Taku splitting. He also gets plenty of relationships as well. We see him being included on stuff, despite not being in the core of things. On paper, this is a great merge episode. And one other thing was the fact that he kind of ties it back to his exotic animal background, where in the premiere, he said he's going to be like a pigeon that turns into an owl. In this episode, he says that, obviously, the shark, he's going to be a shark that jumps up and eats people. So, again, everything seems perfect on paper. However, I think this episode also made me less secure about him winning the game. And I said this all season now. I said that he has a perfect winner's edit on paper. However, like I've seen with previous situations like this, does that actually make him the winner? And at this point, I've been feeling less and less certain of that, even though the edit has really propped himself up. And at this point, I'm starting to see the possibility where he is a decoy winner. He's sort of like an Anesu from SA Immunity Island. He's sort of like Tiffany or Evie from 41. He's like Sophie from Winners at War. He's like Kelly from IOI, or some other examples you can think of. This is such a perfect merge episode that it makes me feel less confident about him, as weird as that sounds. So with that combined with me just not feeling super comfortable with him being in first place all these weeks, despite my reservations, it's made me drop him down to number 2. Now, again, he's still a top contender. I mean, I can't ignore all these great things he's got in his edit. But after this episode, I'm starting to feel more and more like he could be a surprise boot at some point. He could be this Sophie figure that has been getting this great edit all season, but then has a downfall episode. And through that, whoever takes him down has a good shot of actually being the winner. So with all those things in mind, I decided to have Omar here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the person I think is the most likely to win Survivor 42 right now is Mike. And yes, I decided to move Mike up to number 1 this week. Not because he has the best edit in the world, as I literally just talked about with Omar, who has the perfect edit right now. But I wouldn't be surprised if Mike, again, fulfills a lot of the stories here. And with me deciding to move Omar down, I feel like it's logical to move Mike up. So in episode 6, he has a confessional about not being surprised that Chanel voted for him, argues with Chanel about it at camp. People seem to make up, and has a confessional about understanding that it's a game. Even so, he's not going to trust Chanel again. On the other hand, he would take a bullet for Hai and Lydia, which is sort of funny, is on the blue team who loses the challenge, Back at camp, Drea talks to him about working together, tells her that Chanel is the one from Vati he can't trust, has a confessional about them bonding over them having idols and how they could protect each other. He admits to not feeling safe and that he won't go out with an idol in his pocket, talks to Marianne about the idol, bonds with Jonathan about how he was judged a lot as a kid, has a confessional about how there's more to Jonathan than people assume. He knows what it's like for people to underestimate him and thinks he's something he's not. He plans to look out for Jonathan looking forward, and he wants to allow the bigger physical players to win for once. Roxroy smashes the hourglass, making him safe. And from that point on, he kind of takes a back seat. He does agree to vote out Lydia, which he ultimately does, which does kind of conflict with what he said earlier about taking a bullet for High and Lydia. But again, he is in the majority, technically speaking. And again, it's not a perfect edit. Like I said, the High and Lydia stuff he said earlier on isn't ideal. Plus some earlier stuff I mentioned in earlier episodes. Even the comment about him saying that he won't go out with an idol in his pocket. That could lead to something, but more than likely, I think it probably means he won't go out with an idol in his pocket. And again, this is a solid enough episode for him that really zeroes in on his relationships. He does bond well with Drea, like due to their idol. He bonds well with Jonathan, and I love that quote where he says that he wants to allow the bigger physical players to win for once. That's such a fantastic quote that makes me think that him and Jonathan should be top contenders at this point. And along with that, you wrap that around with the theme of him saying that the most well rounded player will win. Well, it's possible that he means that, again, the most well rounded player will win. He talks specifically in this episode about being a big physical person, which ties into the physical aspect. He talks about the social aspect through him building bonds with all these two people coming into the merge. And he talks about strategic as well, where he talks about his idol and he talks about being in the alliance. Mind you, again, one flaw is that he's not really part of the scramble leading up to tribal, but that's not a breaking point per se. And with Omar dropping due to me thinking he has a true perfect edit, I feel like Mike is all right. He's a good enough pick. He has a solid enough edit without being too blatantly perfect. Now, I could see people saying that he could be too visible. However, he has gotten a consistent enough presence. And plus, he's just a big character at the end of the day. So, again, I feel good about Mike for now. Now, I could see him dropping moving forward. But with the state of the game that we're in, I feel like Mike is the most likely person to win Survivor 42. And there we go. That will do it for this week's Power Rankings. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And like I said, I'll be back next week to update the Power Rankings again for Survivor 42. Big Brother Canada is still happening, so I'm still updating the Power Rankings for that. And with the schedule clearing up a bit with Australian Survivor ending, I am planning to make some more general videos. Now, admittedly, I am going to be doing some more brand steals as well, but I do have some general Survivor videos that could be interesting, so I'm very excited to make those. But for now, that is the video. See ya.